My name is Jana Behrens. I'm at Amherst College. I'm very happy to introduce to you Madison Stevens, who's a student at Franklin University in Switzerland. Maddie is a majors in comparative literature and cultural studies, and she also has 2 minors, environmental studies and political science. Her interests lie in the intersection of political conflict and culture and the complexities that result at those crossroads. Maddie studied abroad with the School for International Training in Uganda on their post-conflict transformation program. The academic director, who's here today, Martha Nailubega Wandera, nominated Maddie for this award. And in her words, she says, she seized every moment of her stay on the program as a learning opportunity. Martha also notes that her attention to detail, her hard work and patience, and her outgoing attitude are, and I quote, salient prerequisites of any researcher intending to work with underprivileged communities. I've only been working with Maddie for a couple months now, but I am inspired by her deep commitment to the subject matter, which she presents with such maturity and patience. It is with great pleasure that I turn over the podium to Madison Stevens.
Afoyo bino tin, ni alaniero Madison Stevens, amiro watchwu me timori church malarangom I acholi me kumalo me Uganda. Thank you for coming today. My name is Laniero Madison Stevens, and I want to talk to you today about doing research on land conflicts in the Acholi region of northern Uganda. During my first week in Uganda, I was introduced to the people who would become my Acholi family, Ganga Acholi. My Acholi host mother's first act of generosity was to give me a local name. Well, naming in Uganda is a really interesting tradition. While children are given a Western name, their local Acholi names are often based on the circumstances surrounding their birth, beliefs regarding their fate, or some kind of national personality trait. Alice decided to call me Laniero, which means the girl who laughs. This name and the identity that came with it paved my way through more than a few tense situations over the course of my research. To backtrack a little, I was born on a farm in rural Montana into a family of intrepid travelers who happen to be here today, with a deep appreciation for the outdoors and the land around us. The first time I visited Africa, I was 3 months old. We went back again when I was 4 years old, at a time when I had a little bit more mobility and motivation to explore, and then again as a teenager. These trips and the ones that followed planted the seed for my lifelong love of Africa and my desire to be a part of movements making change in this challenged region. So, when the opportunity arose to study abroad in Uganda, a place I'd never been before, I was ecstatic. SIT's program on post-conflict transformation in northern Uganda stood out for the unique chance to conduct independent research as an undergraduate student. During the course of my 3.5 months in northern Uganda, I came to appreciate other aspects of the program as well. Its focus on Acholi language study and the immersion with the local culture, the level of independence we had as students, and most of all, the close connections I was able to form with my host community. Located on the equator in the heart of East Africa, Uganda is one of the most linguistically, ethnically, and culturally diverse countries on the planet. The Nile River divides the northern Nilotic tribes from the southern Bantu tribes, each of which is composed of thousands of different clans with their own distinct cultural traits. During our program, we chose to focus on the Acholi region in the north. From 1987 until 2006, northern Uganda was gripped by a devastating conflict between the government of Uganda, based in the south, and a rebel group known as the Lord's Resistance Army, led by Joseph Kony of the infamous Kony 2012 campaign. During this time, over 90% of the population of the Acholi sub-region were forcibly relocated into squalid, internally displaced persons camps, where protection was poor and disease was rampant. The ramifications of this conflict are still felt deeply today across the region, and these were the focus of our studies while on the program. The first time one of our lecturers identified land conflicts as the most serious obstacle to peace in post-conflict northern Uganda today, I was intrigued. Almost every other lecturer after that mentioned the same issue, and they connected it to problems as disparate as gender, food security, trauma, and politics. And they emphasized the lack of information that exists today about this subject, particularly in the more rural districts, including Noya, which is where I chose to focus my study. I knew I had found my topic. After some initial interviews, I identified 4 core objectives for my study. First of all, to identify key causes of land conflicts within Noya district, which is currently one of the most turbulent regions of the country in terms of land disputes. Secondly, to identify cultural and customary factors that influence the application of land conflict adjudication within Acholi land. to assess the strengths and weaknesses of the existing land dispute resolution mechanisms, and finally, to articulate strategies for addressing the challenges to implementation of the existing resolution and prevention mechanisms. These objectives form the backbone of my study, but what I learned during the course of the research went so much further, and that's what I want to focus on for today. Because questions of culture were so central to my topic, I knew that first-hand observation of the land conflict mediation process would be an invaluable part of my research and the most important of my research methods. During the first week in Uganda, or during the first week on my independent study, I made connections with local government officials and traditional leaders in Noya district and immediately ventured out into the field. I found myself immersed immediately in the struggle to confront a dauntingly complex and emotionally charged issue. It quickly became clear to me that these disputes are not simply about the dirt beneath our feet, but about the connection between place and identity that impact all of our lives. Our program assistant, Simon Petro Ola, once drew for us a sketch of what the ideal researcher would look like. This person has big eyes for seeing things well in observation, big ears for listening well, a small mouth for only asking the right questions, and most importantly, a very large bladder for the long days spent in the field. From my experiences in Noya district, I would add to this two things: a backside of steel for the long motorcycle rides into the more rural parts of the country, and a sense of inexhaustible patience and an open mind. To illustrate some of the insights I gained through this experience, and to give you a sense of the program as a whole and the experience as a whole, I want to share with you a couple of stories that poignantly impacted my research. On the third day of my research, the district official I was tagging along with was called in to handle a situation that had arisen the day before. An American development NGO called Newdale had been directed to drill a borehole for the community of Borolam of 10,000 people who currently had no safe access to drinking water at the time. However, the titles of the land where the borehole was intended to be drilled were currently being contested in the High Court of Uganda. A wealthy Acholi family living in the US called the Abe family had claimed 6,000 acres of property for themselves for investment purposes and ordered the residents evicted. They had also fenced off the only source of drinking water for this entire community and guarded it with guard dogs. Although the documents, when the community took the case to court, although the documents had been proved forgeries that the Abe family had provided, most of the people I talked to were dubious about how the court might rule, believing that the endemic corruption within the Ugandan court system would favor the wealthy family and they would be evicted. When the trucks arrived to drill the borehole, they discovered that the land ownership was contested, and Newdale ordered them to leave, suspending the project. Desperate, the community blocked the road and at Spear Point refused to let the trucks leave until a borehole was drilled. When we arrived, it was immediately apparent that this situation was very different from the other mediations I had attended up to that point. A group of people, including young children, occupied a makeshift camp in a flattened area among the trees, which you can see. 3 trucks blocked the road, their operators in the cabs. The tension among the community was palpable. After introductions were made, one Ladiet, an elder, spoke passionately in Acholi about the plight of the community, the theft of their land, and their lack of access to water. Over the next couple of hours, members of the peace team attempted to calm the situation and explain the need to wait until the matter was settled in court before drilling the borehole. Faced with an intolerable situation, the community threatened to resort to violence if the trucks left. During a break in the proceedings, I went to sit with a group of women who were shelling groundnuts, which is a local staple food. After introducing myself as Laniero, they laughed, I took care to sit with my knees out to the side in the manner that's appropriate for Acholi women, something which they seemed to find amusing and also endearing. While we worked, they shared their stories with me. They talked about their families. They talked about the situation being displaced during the war, their time in the IDP camps, and the endemic land insecurity they've faced ever since, coupled with the lack of access to water. As we chatted in Acholi, and they gently corrected my Acholi pronunciation as well as my G-nut shelling technique, the relationship between us changed subtly. While they stopped interacting with me just as a foreigner, I stopped seeing them just as research subjects. The relationship between us became almost familial. Near the end of the time, one of the women who I was shelling groundnuts with came over to me with a pot full of them. She walked up to me and gestured that she wanted to give them to me as a gesture of appreciation for the help that I had given them, which was very little, and I'm sure I didn't shell nearly that number of groundnuts. But the generosity of this community, even in the most desperate of situations, was absolutely overwhelming to me. By the end of the day, we had reached a tentative conclusion about the situation. Although the land matter hadn't been solved because the Abe family hadn't showed up, we decided that we would find a new place to drill the borehole where the community could access the water that wasn't on the disputed land, and Newdale agreed to go through with that. The land conflict situation itself was still a continuing matter, and I'm not actually sure what ended up happening with that. This experience highlighted some of the key findings of my research. That displacement during the conflict is one of the most significant causes of land conflicts, that due to corruption and lack of access, the formal justice system in Uganda is at this point essentially useless for resolving land disputes, that wealthy investors like the Abe family, instead of cooperating with local communities, are more likely to displace local residents in pursuit of their own interests, that these powerful parties have no incentive whatsoever to show up to a mediation like this one, and then that process is then rendered futile when only one side participates. Finally, that residents in turn resort to violence as a last option because they have no recourse to successfully address land disputes. As respondents often explain to me, the further the symptoms of these issues are left to escalate without a solution, the more entrenched the deeper causes become. The next day, I joined Rote Atoketa, the chief of the Koch clan, in a mediation that addressed several of the common consequences of land disputes, and gave me a glimpse of the traditional mechanisms for resolving disputes among the Acholi people. In addition to the underlying land conflict between two brothers, this mediation would address a breach of Acholi custom. These are two elderly brothers. The son of the first brother, believing that the land belonged to their father, planted banana crops on the land that the second brother had claimed to be his. In retaliation, the sons of the second brother destroyed the crops, which is a major cultural taboo requiring the performance of a key ceremony, that is, the sacrifice of a goat to cleanse the land. And I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. Along with performing this ceremony, the mediation would address the fact that a son of the first brother, angered by the destruction of his crops, had physically threatened the chief on a previous visit. Underlying each dimension of this conflict were shocks from the massive cultural shift that took place during the time of displacement, and the tension between new and old ways of thinking that has been growing steadily ever since. On one hand, the chief himself represented the voice of tradition and was present to help uphold stability. Meanwhile, changing circumstances in the community during and after the conflict had led to certain members taking risks in the name of progress and personal gain, and they were now experiencing lashback from the more traditional values. Youth are also marginalized from this process, and so the young person who was in this conflict had been experiencing a total marginalization from the whole process and was feeling frustrated. These tensions came to the fore during the key ceremony. On our way to the field, the planter Obale became aggressive, shouting at the elders for their refusal to compensate him for the loss of his crops, and shouting at me for being a foreigner in a place I obviously didn't belong. While the goat was being slaughtered over the slashed banana plants, Obale lashed out, throwing a punch at another community member in his frustration and anger over the situation. Although the altercation was over quickly, it left me intensely aware of being an outsider. I was, for the first time in my research, overtly recognized as obtrusive because of my cultural background and the threat it posed to the local system and the local culture. I was forced to question my role as a student and as a researcher of a volatile subject. Ultimately, I think there's something valuable in having a non-local eyewitness like myself in a situation like this, to lend perspective. However, it was also a vivid lesson in the challenges and consequences of conducting independent research as a foreigner. And I'll be talking a little bit more about the ethics of this in a session right after this, so a shameless plug, you should come if you feel like it. In the wake of the fight, Rote Atoketa worked to calm the situation and continue with the land conflict mediation. Ironically, this was one of the more successful mediations I attended during the course of my research. The presence of the Rote and the community elders provided the necessary forum for the brothers to be able to come together and hear each other's complaints and resolve the situation based on a compromise based on customary practices. Although the case hadn't been resolved entirely, and there was still the matter of Obale's violent behavior to be dealt with later, significant progress had been made by the end of the day. Observations during this mediation formed the basis of two of my key findings: that both Acholi traditional customs and the recent cultural cataclysm resultant from long internment in IDP camps has had a notable and very unpredictable impact on the land conflict resolution process, and that alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, particularly when carried out by traditional leaders like Rota, who are knowledgeable and not unnecessarily biased, can be a very positive force for change. Despite the challenges associated with the return, there is a tenuous sense of hope in post-conflict northern Uganda. There is an Acholi phrase that captures this idea, rupin. Although it literally means dawn or sunrise, the phrase also carries a deeper significance, referring to the belief that something brighter will come, that there's always some sense of light on the horizon. Bishop Ochola, an influential Acholi peace activist, explained it to me like this. We are like someone in the sea, but the head is still up. And we are saying, tomorrow will come. Tomorrow will always come. Language is a crucial part of understanding the cultural context of any issue, and particularly conflict. There are 56 languages in Uganda, and in the region where I worked, very few people speak the official language of the country, which is English. This marginalizes them from the formal court system, the business world, and the political sphere. In a place where a huge portion of the population don't even share a language with their president, translation plays a key role in constructing relationships between individuals and between groups. I titled my research Larangom I Acholi because the phrase Larangom carries a double meaning. In common language, it is the term used to describe land conflicts in Acholi, particularly cases of land grabbing, where one person takes land from another. However, the word Lara doesn't only mean to grab, it also means to save, or to rescue, or to keep. It is a second translation that poignantly echoes the Acholi conception of land itself, which is focused around stewardship and the rights of future generations to hold the land of their forebears. The Acholi culture right now is at a crucial turning point, I think. The decisions made today will be reflected in the legacy of the land that is passed on, and whether Larangom continues to represent conflict and strife, or whether there can be a turn towards a new meaning, to save the land, to protect it, to hold it. I'm deeply grateful to all the people and organizations who helped make this research a success. I'm honored and humbled to accept this award. To end with an Acholi expression of the deepest gratitude, thank you hard, truly. Afoyo matek adada.